All right, we're on. So let's start with the first question here, which is many of our discussions center on understanding success or making crucial decisions. Today, we are trying to account for failure. To begin your group discussion, quickly reconstruct the key elements of Cake financial business model. Customer value proposition, go-to-market plan, technology and operations strategy, cash flow formula. Um, Customer value proposition. Oh, start on that one. Let's see.
Are we just having, you just want to focus on that, or can we jump in? Or
Oh yeah, you can jump in. I'm just looking up what that means.
okay, yeah. So the customer value proposition is basically what the is getting out of the product or service, and so a lot of the times, you know, the entrepreneur will decide what the customer value proposition is, but then later on they have to figure out like what the customer is actually receiving rather than what they assume that they're getting out of it. So initially, basically what he thought it was an automated portfolio management service that could buy and sell stocks and mutual funds based on the transactions of top performing like stock traders. And then it had it relied a lot on being able to use a social media aspect of it, so you could like compare portfolios with your friends and family and learn from each other to be able to make better trades and stuff like that. So
yeah, I think that's dead on. I think he relied heavily on the fact that people would want to connect with friends and family and want to see how other people's stocks were doing. All right. Any other feedback on that one?
No, that kind of ties into my question 4, which was after your group has recreated the business model, vote, was Cake doomed from the beginning, or was this a promising business model? I don't necessarily think Cake was doomed from the beginning. I don't think it was a great idea necessarily, and I kind of like the idea of sharing information with people via social media. I don't think that's a terrible idea, but the idea that people would want your buddy to see how your stocks are doing and like how much you have saved for retirement, I don't necessarily think too many people would be keen on that part of it. And then also, from what I was reading, he focused way too much on like the back end, and his website or the app just wasn't very user friendly.
Yeah.
And so I think it wasn't the greatest idea overall, but I think the implementation was pretty much what sunk them.
Yeah. I personally thought it was I thought it was a pretty good idea. I think it might have been a little early or before its time.
Yeah.
I think if Cake would have come out in 2010, it probably would have been a lot more successful. First, because social media, the information age has really taken off since 2006. But also because they would have avoided the recession, which they really couldn't do anything about that. That was just kind of bad luck on their timing. So.
Kind of adding into the feedback a little bit, I think when they brought on that whatever his last name was, Tony.
Yeah.
He was definitely a big help, but he was a lot later in their process. So a lot of the things that he introduced and suggested that they change, I think were changed a little bit too late. They pivoted way too late. When you pivot, for your customer segment, you got to do that often and earlier on, but they waited way too long before they changed anything. And by then they were already very established and very, they already had, customers and everything like that. So to pivot at that point is just going to start confusing people. And one of the suggestions he made that really hit me was what he said about their, what was it? The
focus groups.
I liked that as well. When he that was one of the things he learned that they should have was a little bit better. But what Tony had mentioned was that they didn't have a very clear customer proposition. They just kind of like had this idea, and then they were really focused, like you mentioned, on making the technology very advanced and coming out with a really cool, I guess, system that they didn't really have like a very set idea of how does the customer benefit from this service or from using our software, because they can see those things and they can, get ideas about day trading, but how does that really benefit them, and how do, what are they getting out of it? So that wasn't very clear at all from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think they were a little too complex, didn't have a specific enough goal from the beginning. So that's a great point.
To add in just another thought going along with that, it mentioned that in their TechCrunch 40 competition that the company Mint, which was said to be their counterpoint, they became super successful and sold for 170 million. So it just shows that Cake could have turned around from the beginning had they had, as everyone said, a little more direction, a little more guidance and focus.
Yeah, that's a good point. Great point.
All right. So question 5.
All right, and next, discuss Stephen's approach to the opportunity. Try to understand what, if anything, Stephen could have done differently that may have produced a better outcome. On page 3, Stephen says, in retrospect, I'm not sure that these early focus groups were very helpful. They validated our high-level concept, but we did not seek feedback on a specific product. I've learned that focus groups for technical products can be unreliable because people can't always say what they want until they can actually see it and play around with it. We would have learned more by building a lightweight product and watching how investors used it. We also didn't get much sense of user segmentation from our early focus groups. Later, we learned that there are important but subtle differences between active investors who track their portfolios daily and mainstream investors who pay less attention. Guess, are we just supposed to discuss what he meant by that, or?
I mean, we kind of covered that a little bit in the last question.
Yeah.
Where, kind of with like, one thing that really struck me is I thought about how one of the main things to like Apple computers not early, but with Steve Jobs, with the iPhone and stuff, is just how like easy and user friendly it is to use. And how, it doesn't necessarily matter what all it can do. Like he was trying to make it do everything, but it wasn't user friendly at all.
Yeah.
And so I think if you would have focused more on like being user friendly, that would have made a huge difference. Where like you said Mint, they talked about how they were heavily front end focused and it was really user friendly.
Yeah,
I agree. I think just the idea here is it's easier to create, or maybe not easier is the right word. It's better to create a front end user-friendly platform and then work on the back end as you go, I would imagine, rather than doing it the other way around, perfecting the back end first and then scrambling to improve the front end.
Yeah.
So,
I think something also that we kind of learned from this is that in a startup, you really need a minimum viable product, because if you don't have anything, like anyone can just be like, go to a focus group and be like, so we have this idea, what do you guys think? And they're like, oh yeah, that's cool, I can see myself using that, but they really have nothing to, go off of from there. Even if it's, he was saying in a lot of tech startups, it's hard because you don't necessarily have that software written yet. But I think mainly you have to, that's kind of a necessity to be able to put that in front of them and then go from there to be able to determine, what the customer, what kind of customer use they're getting out of it, as well as what market segment they're going for, because brought in a bunch of mainstream investors and a bunch of active investors, and maybe the active investors thought it was the dumbest thing ever, but the mainstream investors weren't really that involved in their stocks, liked to use it a little bit more, because they didn't even decide what their segmentation was until like Cake 2.0, when they started focusing on mainstream investors. So they were just kind of like shooting in the dark towards like all investors, and those focus groups earlier on could help them kind of specify that a little bit more, who they were targeting from the beginning, if they'd put a product together from the beginning. So
yeah, that's a great point. Let's see, anything else we need to discuss on question 5?
I think we're pretty good.
Okay. Let's head into question 6 then.
Okay, question 6 says, as a group, identify the main reason for Cake's failure. Was the failure just beyond Stephen's control? What low-cost experiment could Stephen have done to test the assumptions behind the main reason for failure? And I think we already talked a little bit about how the failure wasn't beyond Stephen's control. I mean, for one thing, reflecting back, he mentioned a couple of things that the company could have done to have been more successful, as well as their competitors during the TechCrunch competition. Mint, who was actually a large success and in the same market vertical and same company aspect. So that answers question A, a low-cost experiment, though, that Stephen could have done to test their assumptions. What do you guys think?
I'm just going backwards a little bit. I think it was in my view, it's kind of a mix. There were definitely things that he did wrong, or the company did wrong, I should say. And then there was some things that caused them to fail that were beyond their control. And like I said at the beginning, just the timing was bad. They probably couldn't have had worse timing. So that was a hard one to overcome for sure, just with the recession hitting when it did and that sort of thing. But yeah, there were definitely a lot of things that we've already discussed that were within the company's control that they just kind of either dropped the ball on or really didn't see up front.
I think something they failed on too was, like we talked about, the focus group was receiving the feedback, because by the end, when they were about to sell off the assets of the company, they had basically eliminated the social media aspect almost completely.
Yeah.
I think that just kind of trying to combine the two confused a lot of users on what exactly was the point. And so using those focus groups earlier on to pivot your ideas would have probably made it a little bit more user friendly from the beginning and intrigued a lot more users. But like we talked about, just doing those things too late just really kind of killed them.
Yeah, I agree. Just to add, maybe I'm just reiterating here, but if they would have had a more specific goal up front, I think those focus groups and the surveys or whatever they market research that they did would have just been a thousand times more helpful to their company. So they needed to have it already figured out who their target audience was by the time they were doing focus groups.
Right on.
All right, anything else anyone wants to add?
No, I think we've kind of covered it pretty well.
Okay. All right, then I will go ahead and stop the broadcast.